Well, welcome, welcome to the first of the Skirball Tapes for this autumn. Thank you for being here. I'm Catharine Stimpson, and I have the honor to be your host. The Skirball Tapes are conversations with extraordinary cultural figures. They possess radical imaginations, and they create indelible acts. For the next few minutes, you're not going to find any gotcha questions here. Our spirit is one of curiosity, adventure, and wonder. And today, oh, I'm so happy. Our guest is one of the most innovative and searching artists of our time, Anna Deavere Smith. She and I are going to talk for 40 minutes. Then she will take your questions for 5 minutes. So would you please enter your questions in the Q&A box on your screens? Enough of logistics. Let's talk with Anna. I want to show you just a partial list of her honors. University professor at the Tisch School at New York University, founding director of the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue, the National Humanities Medal in 2012, the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize in 2013, the Jefferson Lecture in 2015, the George Polk Award for Career Achievement in 2017, admission to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2019, honorary degrees from Yale, Juilliard, the University of Pennsylvania, Smith College, and Spelman College. But that's only a partial list. And Anna, can we begin going back to the summer of 1992? It's downtown in New York. It's the Public Theater. I've been told I should see a production of a new play about the still raw, violent clash in Crown Heights in Brooklyn in August of 1991 between a Jewish group and Blacks in the community. A young actress had written it, and she was playing all the characters along a spectrum of conflict and catastrophe. It was called Fires in the Mirror. And I sat there, I want our audience to know, I sat there in the darkness and I knew instantly, I knew irrevocably that I was in the presence of a radical, transformative voice in American theater and culture. You know, you're now an icon, 2 books, 5 major productions, films, TV series. Yet one thing that's so marvelous about you, Anna, is that you are still animated by urgency. You are still restless and energetic, on the move, creating your indelible acts. And I think of you as a fusion of stamina and soul. And you have made this career-long commitment to this vast project that only someone of your soul and stamina could execute, called On the Road, a search for American character. Now, I know you're now deep in a workshop for yet another indelible act. But where are you now? You travel globally, but where are you now?
I'm in New York. First of all, let me just say how great it is to be with you, Kate. And where are you, by the way?
I am in a place, South Hole, New York, on the North Fork of Long Island. I wish we were together with our audience, but we are Zooming, and it's better to Zoom than to have nothing. So
I
I'm
agree,
coming to you.
100%.
So, anyway, but it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. So you're in New York, you're in a rehearsal studio. Thank you for
Yep.
taking the time away from the workshop and the rehearsal. But I was wondering, Anna, you travel globally. But once you said about acting itself, you said the spirit of acting is the travel from the self to the other. And you have, in your plays, worked with literally thousands of others. What did you mean that acting is the travel from the self to the other?
Well, first of all, that's such a great question. I hope there's going to be a transcription of this interview, because I know how meticulous you are and how deeply you read, and not just text, but life, from the many, many wonderful conversations I've been able to have with you. Yeah, I mean, when I went to acting school, the idea was that acting was the self, that you know, every character in the world lived inside of me. Well, there are a lot of problems with that. First of all, the slogan they used was the Hamlet in you. And in 1974, the likelihood that any of the women in my class would be cast as Hamlet was quite small, and that, you know, a black woman would be cast as Hamlet is quite small. So, you know, you already have a question in your head with this notion that it's in you. And I over these many decades, have come to think about acting as a broad reach or a broad jump towards another, with an understanding that you probably won't make it. And uh, uh, you know, Richard Schechner, was so important at NYU, so critically important to the field, particularly of performance studies, put it very well. I think that you know, you have an actress trying to be Medea. It's at that point in rehearsal when things are not going well. You know, the director is like, "That's not Medea." She herself is doesn't even feel like herself anymore. She's not herself. She's not Medea. She's a not, which Schechner says is a positive, right? So I think about acting as a reach, and an understanding that I can just try as hard as I can. And in my case, because I've spent so much of my career performing real people, there's the evidence that I'm not there. You know, there's the evidence that that real person is uh, maybe in the audience or in their house in Southold, but at any rate, I'm not them. And I accept that condition of being in between.
But Anna, that's why your work is not mere impersonation, because it also shows the effort to understand the other, doesn't it?
Well, it's not we think of impersonation, it's, you know, it's what's the intention? And the intention of
Yeah,
impersonation is to get a laugh. I hope that people find things that are humorous in my work, but that's not the intention. The intention is the reach, and the intention is to embody those individuals in particular who have something to say, usually about a community crisis or a human crisis, right? So, you know, it takes a village. I don't think any one of us right now, it's very hard, isn't it? You would know better than I to presume to claim authorship about the world that we live in. That's how I felt, you know, in the 80s when I was developing this way of working, is that we have a fractured reality, we have a fractured society, and we need to hear from many voices.
but you believe, don't you? This is what one of many things I pick up and learn from you. You believe in what Martin Luther King said in Letters from the Birmingham jail, that despite the divisions, despite the constant and often brutal negotiation of American identities, we do belong to a common tapestry, a common cloth.
Of course we do. I mean, you know, one of the, in that one paragraph where Martin Luther King quotes Paul Tillich, and he quotes Martin Buber. And of course, Martin Buber was a theologian who, uh, in his book, Ich do, I thou, right? I have an opportunity when I see you or any other human to turn you into an it or a you. And so I think ultimately what great humanists are asking for is that we see the humanists in each other, and that nobody is that nobody's an it. And, you know, King
Right.
was working against the wave of Black people and other people in the world being considered like objects, things.
Absolutely dehumanized.
Dehumanized.
I want to ask you where it all began in Baltimore, but I must ask you more about comedy because you're often very, very funny. You're funny in conversation, and some of your characters are hilarious. I think of Anne, the governor of Texas, talking
Ann
about
Richards, yeah.
Ann Richards talking about her chemotherapy, and she's hilarious. So, what is the function of comedy? Not only in your work, what is the function of the
Well,
comedy?
I think it's, what is it? I mean, you would know better than I.
No, no,
Comedy
no,
is,
no, no.
first of all, just in terms of, anything you put on stage, you want to have a couple of laughs just to keep people with you, no matter how dark it is. But it's also, I think, understanding, when you evoke Ann Richards, if I can remember, says, I had asked her if she was I said, well, you were the first governor of Texas. She said, well, no, in the 20s, there was Pa Ferguson, and he was married to Ma, and Pa got impeached, and Ma became governor, and she was the one who said about bilingual education, if the English language is good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for everybody. And here's, Anne getting ready to go into proton therapy, which she was one of the first people to get it for a, very bad case of esophageal cancer. So, so somebody like Anne could find something funny about her situation. I think that humor gives us courage. People say laughter is the best medicine. And also, our comics are transgressive, and the fool in
In Lear, yeah.
various kinds of literature, the fool's the one who says the things that everybody else is afraid to say. So there's also something about comedy that's very truthful that people won't listen to unless it's twisted a little bit. And so, our comics are critics of our society as well as the people who make us laugh.
But Anna, and then I really do want to ask you about where it all began in Baltimore. But what happens when the comedy becomes sadistic?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why comics scare me a little bit. Rufino Tamayo has a painting of a bunch of it was, I think it was came from, because I remember it the wrong way, some kids butchering chickens called the comedians. I suppose, and I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a historian of culture, but I think it must be the case that when comedy turns mean or becomes sadistic, it is a signal of a kind of sadistic society. Or, blackface, we're talking about, you evoke Martin Luther King, think of the forms of comedy that were kind of buffoonery,
Right.
which was meant, again, to dehumanize the people that were represented.
As opposed to the comedy that liberates.
Exactly. That's right.
But Baltimore, you're born in Baltimore in what sounds like a very wise family. Tell us, if you will, about your mother. You dedicate 2 books to her, to Anna Young Smith. She was an educator, a school principal. What she loved you, obviously. She believed in you, obviously. What did she teach you?
Well, man, that is a great question. I mean, that I'm sure I've been asked before, but these things change. Well, first of all, she was the mother of 5 children. I was the oldest. She was a kind of a middle child in a family of 8 children. Only 2 people are left from that family. And in fact, only 2 people left from my parents' generation, Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Donald. And curiously, with my mother, the story goes that she was standing by my grandmother's bedside when people had babies at home, when Uncle Warren, I think, was born. And the preacher would come, when people had babies or when they died at home. A Reverend Green came and he said to my grandmother, well, where did you get that pretty little girl? And my grandmother allowed the preacher to take my mother, because he and his wife didn't have any children. And so she grew up part of the week in the parsonage of the church, and part of the week with her family. So she was, and she, she told that story, but she never told me like what that meant for her to be in that situation. So I think that she was a Pisces. Um, uh, she had dreams about fish, and then people in her church would die. I mean, was a very deep person. So I think there was more to my mother than I ever really understood. But what I learned from her was kindness.
Hmm. Which becomes, I think, an increasing theme in your work, the need for kindness. But was her father, not the preacher, but was her father the grandfather who taught you about using words to learn about
No,
people?
that was my father's father. Her father was a chauffeur, and he worked in the billiards room of the Maryland Club, which was a private club for white men in Baltimore. I subsequently, without realizing he had worked there as a cocktail waitress one summer. My grandfather, my paternal grandfather, is the one who said, if you say a word often enough, it becomes you. And this goes back to the style of acting that I've been involved with for so long, is really trusting that the words people say are the most important part of that reach that I was talking about before.
Didn't you say at one point, people say you have to walk in somebody's shoes to know them, but you believe you have to hear their words to know
So
them?
you walk in their words.
Yeah.
Yeah, you walk in their words.
But you also tell, at least you've talked to me, about being a girl in Baltimore, and you were in a class, a segregated class, and all of a sudden there were a group of observers that came into the classrooms that looked at the students. And what were they doing, and what were the consequences for the children who were not chosen?
Well, I mean, I don't know, this is a girl's memory, right? And
Yeah.
it was an all-black school, James Mosher Elementary, and these people would come in and just watch. And what to, I put it together to mean that they were deciding which kids were going to go to turned out actually in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. Baltimore, I'm told, had the biggest concentration of Jewish people other than Brooklyn in America. And, so I went, not busing the way we think about busing, but I had to go take two buses in quite a long time to get to this school that was predominantly white people. And I think those people had something to do with choosing who went there from our school.
But don't you tell a story almost to fall into a kind of painful consciousness of the little girl who was brilliant star of the class,
Yeah.
who was not chosen?
Yes, I do think about Mary Jarvis was her name because she was beautiful and she was really, really smart. Even my mother knew how smart she was. I think my mother, who was a reading teacher at my elementary school briefly, she must have had access to our tests or our IQ tests or whatever. And she was brilliant. And she didn't get chosen. And she just cried and cried and cried. And I think that the reason she wasn't chosen, and this is something that interests me and is a part of what I've been working on for now, juvenile justice, is that she didn't really have anybody to stand up for her. Like her mother was a good woman, we call a good woman, but her mother wasn't educated and didn't have like didn't, I think she was uncomfortable marching up to the school to defend her daughter. Whereas for me, my mother was part of that whole group of Black teachers, and I knew how smart Mary was. I knew she was smarter than me. And I found it heartbreaking that she couldn't come with us. And great that she knew we were getting a better opportunity than she was going to get, that she knew where she could go. Very unusual girl. She
But
was an
Anna, that's
athlete. She was fab. Nobody wanted me on the team. I couldn't catch a ball. She could climb. She was fabulous. And now, I think there would be many, many opportunities for a girl like her.
well, that's interesting that Mary Jarvis is one of the figures behind your extraordinary last big production, Notes from the Field, which is about the school to prison pipeline and the terrible. I mean, one of the things that I see in your work is that sense of pain at the waste, pain at the waste of some of the people that you show us in Notes from the Field, the talent that we have lost and the pain that we have created. But then, didn't you go to Western High School in Baltimore? And how was that?
Look at that.
That is Western High School in 1967 when you graduated.
Amazing. Across the street from the Greyhound bus station, and some girls would go over there. That would never happen now. Actually, this summer I did a workshop, a performance workshop with girls from Western, back in my alma mater. No, that was a wonderful experience. Going to Western was a beautiful, beautiful experience. It changed me. It was great.
How so? How did it change you?
Well, I think it's because of two people, really. First of all, I was terrified about going up, high school, and again, it was a majority white environment. And I feel it was my first day of school. I was walking down the hallway and somebody said, "Aren't you a Smith?" And it was this short, elegant woman. She looked like a majestic, but little Black woman who had taught all the people in my mother and father's generation. She taught Latin, Miss S.E.M. Hughes. And this was her first year as vice president of Western. Western was now so crowded that we went to school on shifts. And the other relevant person, there was a principal who was absolutely unapproachable, Miss Kell. The other person was Mr. DeWolf, who had a disability. And all these years later, I really think one of the reasons that the environment was humane and humanist and full of possibility as Western is that there were two people in charge who had spent their lives, some of their lives, as being outside, and yet they were the best of what they were the best. And and Miss S.E.M. Hughes was she really was a role model. I'm very careful how I use that word, but I would go and talk to her at the end of the summer. She would always have been to Europe or somewhere, and I was just crazy about her and about how big the world was to her and for her.
Then when you went acting to the Conservatory, American Conservatory Theater Drama School, and you received again a classical education. But again, I think of you as soul and stamina. And of course, the church, the Black church in Baltimore was important to you, wasn't it, as well?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it was a
Yeah.
part of, in those days, I didn't know very many Black people who weren't a part of some church community. So, what church was community, a way of convening and learning about responsibility, learning about leadership, a lot of opportunities for that too. I was actually a Methodist at the time.
But you talk when you were in San Francisco, and this is the soul and stamina that I see in you, soul and stamina. You talk, and I hope I have it correctly, that when you were a student, you would go up a very steep hill every day and take communion in Grace Cathedral. You would come down and you would swim. You would have a pauper's breakfast, and you would go to class. Do you still bring together the climbing the hill to grace and the swimming, bringing together both forms of discipline and exercise of the body and the soul?
Well, yeah, of course, and I think anybody who's watching this, who's an artist or a performer, probably does that too. As it turns out, my swimming pool has been closed for a while, or just a few weeks, to get regrouted or something like that. But no, exercise has remained a very important part of my life. Many years after that, I became an artist in residence at Grace Cathedral. As a matter of fact, I preached there on Juneteenth. They asked me to come and preach. And so even though I kind of went away from Grace Cathedral for many years, I ended up going back there, and it's an important part of my life. And the other thing about Grace Cathedral and many churches, which I know you appreciate, is the beauty. It's a very beautiful place. I
Yes,
find that beauty is very important.
to the spiritual life and to our everyday
Everything,
material.
everything, everything, everything.
But then you become a young actress. It's just before you do this play that everybody downtown has to go see. But is it true? Is the urban legend true that you survive as a dog walker?
Well, I survived as many things, but the thing about the dog walking, which if I'd known that you then, you would not have allowed me to become a dog walker. I actually was on a tenure track at Carnegie Mellon University. After I got my MFA at acting school, I quickly got this job at Carnegie Mellon. And I stayed there a year, and then I decided that I wanted to go back to New York, and that I didn't really care what would happen. People thought I was crazy because, of course, being an acting teacher, there are not many at that time, very few tenure tracks. Being a woman, being Black, very few. Why was I giving that up? Well, I wanted to go back to New York and develop the form of acting that I was trying to create. And so I did. I walked the dog, a little dog called BB. And it turned out that that was also relevant because the person who owned the dog coached newscasters. Her name was Lillian Wilder. So she coached like George Bush before he became president. She coached Oprah Winfrey. And so I was typing up the notes that had to do with, speech and with power. And so even though I was walking BB and typing up those notes, I lucked out that I was learning something.
But Anna, you waste nothing. You waste nothing. But there's also a story about the origin of Fires in the Mirror that you have written. You're directing a play. It involves 20 actors, and you're way, way, way off Broadway. And you
Yeah.
realize no matter how many dogs you walk, no matter how many cocktails you serve as a waitress, you can't pay 20 actors. So what do you do?
Well, at that time, when I was able to attract 20 actors to work with me because I was working on this form
Right.
that I called Speeches in Action. That was what I do now, what I developed. And so they wanted to do this workshop, and I promised them a performance. They wanted to have a performance so they could bring agents and everybody. And so I then went around New York and found people who looked like those actors. And I would say, if you give me an hour of your time, I'll invite you to see yourself perform. And they could talk about anything they wanted. One guy was the lifeguard at the Y on 63rd Street. He talked about swimming lanes in Japan. A hairdresser talked about narcissism. Meredith Monk actually gave me an interview, unbelievable. She talked about New Mexico. And so then we had this night in a loft on Leonard Street where all of these real people paraded in with their friends and family, almost like entourages, and watched themselves performed. And it worked. And people say to me, well, how do you know it worked? Well, it worked because everybody's happy. That's how you know things work, because everybody's happy at the end. Everyone's happy. And it was really an electric evening. And I thought, well, I want to do more of this, but how am I going to pay for it? Now, I had been able to pay for it. This was like a one-note samba thing. I wasn't going to be able to do that again. These are actors. They'd be going off doing, waiting tables and stuff to have enough money to take classes. And that's when I remembered that as a kid, I was a mimic. I was an impersonator. And so I thought, well, just to refine this thing that I'm trying to refine and do, I'll do it I'll play all the parts. And so I started doing that, and then, you get known for that one thing, people expect that. I will say that I'm very happy now to have turned it over. And Twilight, for example, was done last fall in New York with 5 actors. I revised it, my play about the Los Angeles riots, and it's now being done at the American Repertory Theater. Boston Globe just gave a great review. So
A great review. I read the review. It's a great review.
turning the work over. And other people are now, I think, in the 90s when I tried to do it with actors, I don't think they took to it, but now they do somehow.
Well, the review, people should know, the review of Twilight being done by actors, with your generosity, giving the work to others. The review says her masterpiece, a masterpiece, is still relevant. Now, Anna, my heart is breaking because we have about 8 minutes left, and I have so many things that we all should hear from you. Could we do just a minute on your work in other media? Because there's a story I would, and then I want to go to the question, themes that I've seen in your later work, a kind of darkness about injury, a darkness about brokenness, and where you are seeking, as well as being, a prophet to help us deal with brokenness. But the other media, now, is it true? Is it true that you said you didn't want to play Dr. Nancy McDolly in West Wing? Is that true?
I didn't say I didn't want to play it, but you knew me then, Kate, and that's when I had the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue at Harvard, and the time that I was called to go out to the West Wing was exactly when our friend, the late Allison Bernstein, was coming up from the Ford Foundation, along with Susan Beresford, the president, to see what I had done with all that money for 3 summers. How was I going to get on a plane and go to LA? But we figured the timing out. I went out and then I came right back, and I have to credit my publicist, the late Stephen Rivers, for insisting that I get on the plane. The thing that's funny about that story is I knew Aaron Sorkin from having been in his movie American President, and this was August. That fall, people were assuming that if George Bush Jr. won as president, that he would have Condoleezza Rice as national security advisor. And I knew Condi from when I taught at Stanford. And so I went over to Aaron and I said, are you, in casting me, are you thinking about Condoleezza Rice? And he said, who? So my joke is, you're looking at the first Black national security advisor right here.
Well, and Dr. McNally, it is an honor. It is an honor to be in your presence. But you were in Italy, in a wonderful town in Sicily, rather, Taormina, on an old volcano, site of ancient ruins, and you wrote to a young artist, quote, I believe that a rehearsal hall, a classroom, a stage is a sacred space. Now, here again, soul and stamina. Do you see the same sense of the sacred in a movie set, a TV set, or in the social media?
Well, I don't know enough about social media, but I would say on a TV set, absolutely, and certainly a set like The West Wing, because everybody's taking a chance. Everybody has something at stake. And in a good space, there's such respect that I would say exactly yes. And on the West Wing, for example, I was so blessed to be able to be in the company of Martin Sheen. Is just a really fine, fine man and a fine actor. So I think to the extent that we can respect one another while we make those reaches, not knowing if we're going to make it, I think that makes the space what we would call sacred, or it has to be respected.
So that's wonderful. And is it also a space of another strong element in your ethic of active listening? When I think of you and your theory of active, I think of Miss Winfrey. I think of Carol Gilgan, the psychologist. You strike me, the three of you, among others, as prophets of the ethic of active listening. And what does one gain from active listening? Other than helping to create a sacred space where sometimes you're there listening for God?
Boy, I don't know. We should have coffee or a meal and talk about that. I guess isn't it the beginning of everything when you're born? If you have hearing, or you're in your mother's womb and there's the beat of the heart, and then you're born and they whisper to you, or they sing to you. I just think the ear is a place of capturing so much, not just information, but it's a link to your humanity if you have hearing. And if you don't, I think there are other ways of making that connection. So I would say that listening is connection.
as well as taking great energy and patience, doesn't it? It's what you mentioned kindness several times. And as I've looked at the wonderful journey in your search for the American character, in certain themes, it seems to me become more and more prominent. And one is the need for kindness to children and the horror of not treat, treating children with kindness and respect. But the other, as I said before, there's the sense, and are we or are we not in a twilight of America, but of brokenness. And then, and then you have one of your prophetic figures, and I do think of you as a prophetic figure, the civil rights attorney, Bryan Stevenson. And he, this magnificent, magnificent person, you have him say that the great discovery is in brokenness, that we understand our need for grace. It's when we're broken that we begin to crave redemption. And clearly, those words, as you heard Stevenson say them, and as you brought them to life on the stage, those words seem to me more and more central to your ethic and your sense of how we get through this moment in America.
Well, one of the things that Mr. Stevenson said to me was that brokenness teaches us what it means to be human. And again, I think that sense of brokenness is the place where, some people talk about the wounded healer, right? It's that place where, and the wounded healer creates a kind of hospitality, right? By an awareness of their own brokenness, they can invite the brokenness of others. And again, I think that's about connection. It's the place where we can possibly come together. I started in 2010 in teaching at NYU. I start every class with confidence is overrated, give doubt a try. And, our friend Diane Yu would always invite me to come to her leadership class, and I would say that. And these are, the leadership, the freshmen, the leaders, and they really had trouble with that. Well, I have to be confident. How am I going to be a leader if I'm not confident? And, people won't trust me. I said, well, it's actually, I think, with doubt that they'll trust you more. And you probably had a chance to meet Tom Sargent at NYU, the economist, who told me that his work at that time in the early 2000s was about decision making in the face of a profound ignorance. And so I think that, we live in a world where we don't know what's happening around the corner. And part of the advantage of living in doubt, of accepting the break, is that we have space for the unknown. And we learn how to negotiate the unknown. And we learn how to open ourselves to strangers, that we decide when we see a stranger whether we're going to embrace that stranger or whether we're going to walk away. So to me, it's all about openness. Because, so in broken is the word, it's quite like the word open as well.
Anna, do you think America, the America that you have worked with so brilliantly, is in a twilight?
I think that's a very hopeful idea that you have.
Well, I am naive. You've known me for long.
No, I mean,
have
you're
to
probably
speak
like me,
naively.
you're probably like me, a hopeaholic. Um, I'm concerned about all the fragmentation. I'm also very concerned that there's every sign in the arts, which should be a healing force, that you can be hurt, trigger warnings. I think that the arts are a place where people are very cautious and afraid of being harmed, whether they're actually making the art, doing the performances, or inviting people in. So that probably worries me more than anything, is this sense that in the arts we could be harmed to do our work and that we could hurt others when they come see our work. I think that concerns me more than anything.
Thank you. Would you take a couple of questions? I know you
Sure.
have to get back to the workshop. I understand. Where are the, oh, anonymous. Of people you've embodied on stage and in text, how do you approach one that seems quite far from who you are? And what does bridging that gap look like for you?
Oh, I'm particularly interested in the people who are very far from what I am. And it's a technique that I believe we quoted my grandfather a long time ago in this talk. If you say a word often enough, it becomes you. So I do believe that if the language of a person who I would say is very far from me is alive, then I just spend all my time trying to learn their language. It's kind of like I would say singing their song. So the same way that a great singer can sing a song, I think of it exactly like that.
Thank you. Another one. Would you ever want to do a play about the January 6th insurrection?
Maybe I would want to. I don't think it's realistic. I don't have any time to do it, but that's a broken moment
Yeah.
in America. That's a very broken moment.
Another anonymous question. As I say, I again and again, in these moments, I've described you as possessing soul and stamina. And here's a question. I think, can you please share your advice for artists who have lost their motivation to create?
Do something else for a while. Um, figure out what you love. Doesn't have to be art. Maybe it's something else that you love, and spend time with that. The most important thing would be to take a break. And I think, again, I'll go back to the beauty prescription. Find beauty. Take your time. Don't push.
And of all the characters, it fits in, but of all the people that you have traveled towards, which were the one or two that gave you the greatest joy in the discovery of them?
Um,
Perhaps the unexpected joy.
John Lewis, who's in Notes from the Field. My Aunt Esther, who I've just started to perform, who was really the first, my late Aunt Esther, who was the first person, one of the first people I even interviewed ever with my tape recorder. I sort of experimented with her. There's a character, not one of mine, but I had a great time with a television show called Inventing Anna, a Shonda Rhimes show, playing a character named Maud. She was a lot of fun.
Was she a clown? Was she a
Huh?
clown? Was she a clown?
She wasn't. She was, but maybe we were kind of clowns, me and the other two actors. We were funny. I mean, it's always hard, because it's Ann Richards, it's just, you don't want to say who's your favorite, because my mother would refuse to say who was her favorite among us, but I think it was my brother next to me, actually. But you can't really, you can't say who.
No, you can't. Well, I want to say that this time shows why you're one of my favorite radical imaginations and creators of indelible acts in American culture today. I thank you, thank you, thank you. I know you have to get back to your workshop. I know that you've made a special effort to be with us. I thank you for the feelings and the inspiration and the truth that you have brought people again and again and again. And I'm sure I speak for all our fellow Zoomers in a spirit of gratitude for all that you've done and for all that you're going to do. So have a good workshop. Take care. Keep on being Anna Deavere Smith.
Kate, thank you so much. It's fantastic to be in touch with you and talking to you. Thank you.
It's been my great pleasure. Thank you. And next month, to the audience, thank you. Next month's exploration of radical imagination will be Edmund White, the author. See you next time. And Anna, all gratitude to you.
Thank you.